I feel like a talk show host.
You look like one too. Kidding. I'm kidding.
Got a nice shirt on.
Hey, yes, so do I.
Yeah, I know. We're matched, which is perfect.
We do.
I know. I even went to the dry cleaners yesterday to pick it up. My first visit there in 4 months because, you know, I'm just wearing like holy t-shirts around all this time.
Hi,
hey, Rachel.
Oh, wow. So we don't see them at all?
We don't see, no, we do not see the participants because you got too many. But you will see, as we see, they're loading in 58 so far. And you'll see chat that comes up like that. And then the questions, which I can use as a pop-down box at the very end if we have time, hopefully.
Okay.
But to anyone who is listening in right now, we'll be starting live in just another minute or so. Now, Nonie, you could put the title screen up right now.
Would you like that?
Yeah.
You don't want people examining your bedroom?
Or at least in a much smaller way.
All right, here, let's, there we go.
Excellent. And then, cool. And then let me see. Very, very cool. Now, I can't see me now, but that's okay. Yeah. All right, and the time. Okay, we're going to start in 1 minute, folks. You can see me, Nonie, right?
I can see you. I can't see anything else.
Okay, perfect.
I don't know about that.
Well, you can see your slides, right?
Yes.
Hey. All right, folks, here we go. Good afternoon. I'm James ZEMAITIS, the Director of Museum Relations at the New York Design Gallery R & Company, and I am coming to you live, as always, from my bedroom in Mendham, New Jersey, for my third Zoom discussion in an ongoing series with American museums about groundbreaking design exhibitions of the past and present. I am here today with Nonie Gadsden, who is the Katharine Lane Weems Senior Curator of American Decorative Arts and Sculpture at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. We are thrilled to have such a large audience joining in today. For today's discussion, if any of you out there would like to ask a question, and we'll try and take that near the end of this 1 hour session, please submit it via the Q&A button and not the chat button. And afterwards, we'll also be posting this to our YouTube channel once we edit it down a little bit. Today, we are here to discuss the exhibition, Women Take the Floor at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, which is both an exhibition as well as a reinstallation of the museum's permanent collection of 20th century American art and design. I was honored to have been present at the opening of this exhibition, what seems like an eternity ago, on September 13th, 2019. One of the exciting things about this exhibition is that because it is a takeover of level 3 of the Art of the Americas wing, this is a long-running show. And when our public institutions in the American Northeast begin to reopen, and better times are indeed ahead of us, this exhibition is scheduled to run until May 3rd, 2021. So there will be plenty of time for you to plan a trip to Boston and see it yourself. Nonie and her team will be rotating in and out some of the more light-sensitive works, but you know, this allows repeat visitors, of course, to see an even greater selection of the permanent collection. The museum timed this exhibition to coincide with the 100th anniversary of American women's suffrage, stating that the Women Take the Floor exhibition challenges the dominant history of 20th century American art by focusing on the overlooked and underrepresented work and stories of women artists. This reinstallation advocates for diversity, inclusion, and gender equity in museums, the art world, and beyond. In Nonie's powerful remarks, which she delivered on the opening night of the exhibition, and which she expounded on in an interview she did with the New York Times back in March, she noted that, quote, "The mere concept of this exhibition raises questions and elicits a wide range of opinions, some positive, some more critical. Some artists and scholars argue that gender-based shows encourage tokenism and relegate women artists to the sidelines, suggesting they can't compete or hold their own with equivalent work by male artists. Others argue that specialized attention to women artists is long overdue and a necessary corrective to the centuries of systemic gender discrimination embedded in museums, galleries, the academy, and the marketplace. Not to mention the fact that commemorating the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage comes with its own concerns, as the campaign for suffrage and other early feminist movements consciously excluded women of color, as suffrage leaders were unwilling to tackle racism in addition to sexism. So, as Nonie wrote, my colleagues and I decided to address these issues head on. Now, before I turn this over to Nonie, I want to share with everyone her biography. She received her BA from Yale and her master's from the Winter program in early American culture at the University of Delaware. I first met Nonie 18 years ago on a visit to the Milwaukee Art Museum, where she was a curator at the time. I believe we first bonded over a Kem Weber airline chair, which she had recently acquired at auction. She joined the MFA Boston in 2004 and was part of the epic curatorial team who planned and installed the MFA's award-winning Art of the Americas wing, comprised of 53 galleries, I should say, featuring the arts of North, Central, and South America, which was designed by Norman Foster's firm and opened in 2010. Now, Boston is one of the centers of the American arts and crafts movement, and Nonie is probably best known for her many exhibitions and publications in this field, ranging from Green and Green to Louis Comfort Tiffany, the Saturday Evening Girls, and a significant body of work on the Boston School of Arts and Crafts, Jewelry, and Metalwork. Nonie, thank you for your time today, and let's have you start us on a visual tour of the 7 galleries that comprise the exhibition, each of which introduces a major theme.
Great. Well, thank you so much, James. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My plan is to say a few words about the overall concepts and goals of the exhibition, then focus on the individual galleries. And of course, James and I will feature the decorative arts and the design as we go. But before I dive in, I want to recognize my many colleagues at the MFA who contributed their talents and knowledge to this exhibition. It certainly was a team effort. And as I chat here, I'll show you some installation views of the galleries, which we will certainly come back to for more in-depth discussion as we go. All right. Why doesn't it want to go? There we go. All right. Hey, all right. All right. As James noted, the exhibition was originally conceived to coincide with the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage and to challenge the dominant history of art in the 20th century by highlighting work of women artists working in the Americas over the past century. Our curatorial team strove to lay bare the systemic gender discrimination within museums, galleries, the academy, and the marketplace that results in women artists being undervalued and underappreciated. We acknowledge the MFA's inconsistent history supporting women artists and pledge to do better. We wanted to create an exhibition that changed people's views and understandings of women's role in art. We vowed to be open and honest about the MFA's shortcomings and our own, to seek the opinions of others outside of the museum, and to offer a platform for discussion and learning. Immediately, we confronted the concerns with commemorating the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, as the campaign for suffrage, as James noted, as well as many other feminist movements of the past century, consciously excluded women of color, as many suffrage leaders were unwilling to tackle racism and sexism at the same time. To counter that history, we embrace the values of current day feminism, of empowerment, consensus building, community, intersectionality, and support. Today's feminists strive to bring multiple perspectives to the table. In response, we pledge to be inclusive in the art that we chose to display and the voices that we present in the gallery. However, we never intended to tell a comprehensive story of all women artists working in the Americas in the past century. That's impossible. So we focused in on our collection. The team soon discovered that the strength of the MFA collection was the first 50 years of our project, so 1920 to 1970. We decided to focus the 6 side galleries on the floor on the overlooked or underrepresented stories of women artists from that period, telling the stories that we could tell well from our collection. Nearly 90% of what is on view in the exhibition is from the MFA collection, and the loans were added to help round out those stories. So why don't we look at some of those galleries, and we'll come back to the central gallery later in the program. Women on the Move, Art and Design in the 1920s and 30s. This gallery, which was co-curated with Emily Javalt, who is now at the American Folk Art Museum, it explores the opportunities and continued restraints of women artists in the years immediately after suffrage. We include painters such as Georgia O'Keeffe, Helen Torr, Lois Mailou Jones, and Gertrude Fisk, and sculptors including Meta Warwick Fuller, as well as craftswomen and designers including Ruth Reeves, Lola Cueto, Nampeo, and all of whose textiles appear in the case, and pottery appears in the case in front of you, as well as Maria Martinez, Maya Gertel, Elsa Tenhart, Belle Kogan, and others. We tried to show some artists in a new context, such as this large case of ceramics by 2 modern masters of the medium, Maya Gertel and Maria Martinez. And James, did you want to say anything about here?
Nothing right here, except, okay. You know, this is it's one of those spectacular just sort of moments. I think I actually this is my photo here. I'd never seen such a juxtaposition before. And it's interesting because both artists, you know, seen here would be, in a sense, reunited in the Objects USA show of 1969. But back to you.
Yeah, well, here's a closer look at 2 of the works in the case. And Martinez in particular is almost always shown in an indigenous context. Rarely is she appreciated for her boldly modern black on black works here, as you see here. Pairing her with Gertel, of course, helps to emphasize that point. And here is a case that is near and dear to your heart.
Yes, for sure. And you know, I think one of the underlying themes of the show, which we see starting here in this case, is how many of the better known American women modernist designers immigrated to this country from Eastern Europe. And, you know, this collection here that we see is a combination of works from your permanent collection and a few key loans. And let's move the slide on so that we can start with the dazzling, extremely original Cubist designs of the German-born Elsa Tenhart. And these are, what we see here on the right-hand side, are from a series of tabletop and dressing items in silver plate and polished brass, which were manufactured by the E&J Bass Company in New York. The candlesticks on the left there are in the museum's John Axelrod collection, and he acquired these from the renowned dealer Greg Nanamura, who I think is watching us today. Hey, Greg. While the centerpiece, or the bonbon dish, as Yale's curator John Stewart Gordon calls it, which is on loan, was actually part of a spectacular cocktail service featuring a shaker, cups, and room on the tray for this piece too. When seen all together, it's one of the stars of the auction market in this field. Let's move on to the Karaz image. And here, works by Ilanka Karaz, who was born in Hungary. And she had a remarkable career, which included furniture, ceramics, dozens of magazine covers for the New Yorker. The Karaz works seen here were actually manufactured not too far from the museum in North Attleboro, Massachusetts, by the firm Pay and Baker. Now, the salt cellar, which we see on the top, is the only surviving example that I know of. It's from an extremely rare series whose austere geometry shows the influence of the Bauhaus and of Marion Brandt in particular on Karaz's metalwork. This piece was originally exhibited in a show on Karaz done by the legendary 50/50 Gallery in New York back in 1984. And it was later sold by me at Sotheby's to the present owner, who has loaned it to the show. The tea and coffee service, on the other hand, is from a much better known series designed by Karaz. It was written about at length in period publications and seems to have been fairly popular based on how many pieces appear on the market today. Let's move on to the next slide. Now, There's no catalog for your exhibition, Nonie, but in looking at the designers included in this show, it's natural to start thinking about additional scholarship and publications which would come out of this. Nonie, you're working on a catalog of American modernism in the MFA's collection, which is the result of the gift of design to the MFA by the legendary Boston collector John Axelrod, after whom the gallery seen here is named. In the case we see before us, Karaz, well, she's been the subject of several exhibitions in a catalog. Tenhart, less so, but her career wasn't as expansive. Then there is this covered serving dish in silver by the Russian-born industrial designer Belle Kogan for the famous silver firm from Taunton, Massachusetts, Reed and Barton, which was loaned to the museum. Tell us a bit more about your catalog that you're working on, the role Belle Kogan plays in it.
Sure. Well, the catalog, I wouldn't necessarily call a catalog, but a publication based off of the MFA's collection of design, which, as you say, is the foundation of which is from the John Axelrod collection. And this catalog is really going to be looking at an American studies approach to design and looking at 5 major impulses of American modern life that affected design and which design in turn affected. So, for example, the impact of electricity on modern design and on living in that period, and going back and forth and focusing in on the story of a single major work in our collection, then rounding it out with images and information about other works in our collection. Those 5 major impulses would be electricity and lighting, skyscrapers, prohibition and cocktail culture. There you go.
Right.
Yeah. Speed and transportation, and then plastics. And Belle Kogan comes in. She is going to be my main protagonist in the plastics chapter, because though she is known as the Silver Lady to many, as this Reed and Barton piece shows, she was one of the early designers working in plastics, starting as early as 1929. And she worked with a company called Carolith to try to combine plastic and metal together for small servingwares. And though they weren't successful, it started a career-long fascination and experimentation with plastics that included the clock that you see here, the Quacker, also known as the smug clock. The Quacker, I think, is the alarm version. Then also later with Bootenware, which you see on the other image on the screen, and that's from the 1950s. The Quacker is from 1934. But she was really, she worked with Bakelite, she worked with all sorts of manufacturers and did a lot of jewelry and so forth. So she was a real innovator in plastic, not just as an innovator, as a woman in industrial design.
Wow. Well, let's move on to the next room then.
Sure. This next room is called No Man's Land. It's the winner of the best title, hands down. It's curated by my colleagues Reto Thurig and Zoe Samuels, who explored how these artists reimagined the metaphorical possibilities of landscapes, often through the distinctly feminine perspective. This gallery includes paintings by Georgia O'Keeffe, Lucita Hurtado, Lauren MacIver, and Doris Lindo Lewis, drawings by Kay Sage, and a sculpture by Beverly Pepper. Next gallery is Beyond the Loom, Fiber as Sculpture, and was curated by my colleague Lauren Whitley, and features the early pioneers who radically redefined textiles as modern art. It includes works by Sheila Hicks, Olga de Amaral, Ruth Asawa, and Kei Sakamachi, all of whom you see here on the screen, as well as works by Lenore Tawney and Annie Albers.
Are all of these works, Nonie, that we look at in the photograph right here, are all of these in the permanent collection?
No, they're not. And this room has probably 50-50% collection versus loans. The Sheila Hicks is the MFA's. The Olga de Amaral is not, though we do have an Olga de Amaral. It had just been out recently, and it's because of its light sensitivity, we borrowed this. The Kei Sakamachi is in the MFA's collection, and the Ruth Asawa is a generous loan.
And the emphasis is on generous, because when I look at this gallery in particular, it's a conundrum actually that I think that is facing museums today regarding the collecting of certain women artists in that the art market's recent focus on women has actually put the potential acquisition of some of them out of reach of most institutions, unless it's by a gift. On one hand, it might take, just like $10,000 to acquire a survey and objects of Belle Kogan's career, but it could take the entire annual acquisitions budget of a major museum to acquire that Ruth Asawa, for example.
Absolutely. And we would, of course, love to have a Ruth Asawa in our collection. And we were very grateful for this loan.
Fantastic. Now, next gallery up is
Women of Action. Women of Action tells the overlooked contributions of women to the action painting movement, or abstract expressionism, which emerged in the late 1940s. Action painters, as most of you know, splashed, dripped, or poured paint onto their canvases to create individual, energetic compositions that reflect the artist's creative impulses and inner psyche. Many women were forging careers as action painters, despite the chauvinist outlooks of art critics and post-war American society emphasis on traditional gender roles. Yet few of these women got the attention they deserved during their lifetimes. The 5 painters represented in this gallery are Joan Mitchell, Grace Hardigan, Elaine de Kooning, Lee Krasner, and Helen Frankenthaler, who each developed their own individual style of action painting that influenced contemporaries and inspired later generations.
And that grouping of ceramics.
Yeah, in the middle of this gallery, I'm going to show you the slide again, partly because it's my favorite view in the exhibition. But it highlights the work of Toshiko Takiezu. And Takiezu considered herself an action painter, though very few did in her day, because it was primarily focused on painting and on canvas. But as she explains later about these signature forms, she called her closed forms that you see here, quote, "After many years, a natural, pure form arrived, one which I enjoy, and also one on which I could paint. I didn't want a flat surface to work on, but a 3-dimensional one."
How did you assemble such a strong collection of these works? Are these from one collection over the years or from multiple donors? I mean, it's incredible.
We actually own 23 examples of her work, only 7 of which you see here. And 17 of them came from Takiezu herself. And it's something I really admire about Takiezu, who was a soft-spoken person, but she curated her own legacy. As she was in her later years, still working at Princeton, or retired from Princeton, but still in that area, she invited major museums who collected craft to her studio and offered them collections of her work. So she placed large collections of her work around the country and ensured her own legacy. I think it was just a really elegant and beautiful way of doing it. But then we can come along and create pairings like this that you see here, where the connection with the Joan Mitchell is just undeniable. And my hope is that we're expanding the canon not only to include women painters, but perhaps women and others working in other media as well.
Fantastic. Let's keep going on now to the next gallery here as well.
Yeah, the next gallery is Women Publish Women, the Print Boom, and was curated by Patrick Murphy. And this gallery will rotate 3 times throughout the run of the show. And the first 2 rotations, Patrick celebrates 3 enterprising women who founded influential printmaking workshops in the late 1950s and 1960s, and who played a formative role in shaping the course of contemporary printmaking in the United States. The first rotation focuses on, on Tatiana Grossman and Universal Limited Art Editions. And the second is on, features the etchings from Crown Point Press of San Francisco, founded in 1962 by Katharine Brown, and lithographs made by Tamarind Lithography Workshop. The final rotation by my colleague Karen Haas will focus on photography of women photographers 1965 to 85. I've already moved on to the Women in Abstraction at Mid-Century Gallery, which really expands upon the themes of women in action by exploring a variety of approaches to abstraction that women participated in a range of media, not only painting, but ceramics, metal, jewelry, furniture, prints, and textiles. And this is a very craft and design rich gallery. And I wanted to show you, because there's multiple cases in here and so forth, you can see some of the works here. And if you look through the center of the middle case, you can see the Lisa McVeigh case in the far side. But here we have ceramics by Lisa McVeigh, Laura Andresen, Beatrice Wood, and Gertrude Natzler. And we have small groupings of each of these artists together. We have medals, and again, multiple works by each of these artists, by Marie Zimmerman, by Maria Renier, and of course, Claire Falkenstein. These are the model gates, the models for the gates that she created for Peggy Guggenheim's home in Venice, which is now the Guggenheim in Venice.
That certainly could have been in the Women in Action room too, because it's,
Totally.
it's, you know, it's,
Totally.
that's like a Pollock painting for
Yep.
sure.
A lot of people, though I don't like comparing things to male artists, I would say that she has her own way.
A weakness on my part. I'm sorry.
And jewelry, you see here, by Mary Rank, Betty Cook, Margaret Tapata, Elsa Frund, and others. So really amazing groupings that we're able to show here, thanks to our deep holdings in these in this field. And then we had this case that was already in the gallery that was celebrating the Eames.
I have
And
seen
I know
that
you like
so
this
many
case.
times.
But we weren't going to be able to move it. And suddenly I was faced with, what am I going to do with this case? And we decided to just shift the story to focus on Ray's contributions and how she was consistently overlooked and underappreciated by the media and society in her lifetime. And we moved a few things and added a plastic tray that she designed. But it really it was sort of a very fun opportunity to just shift the dialogue using our existing display.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite cases that I've returned to over and over in the museum over the past 15 years, because it is, in a sense, an ESU unit there, you know, with everything. And on the other side, usually is where the tremendous collection of mid-century plastics, I think, is usually shown well. Oh, it's
and
amazing.
Right now, that is where all of the studio ceramics are.
Oh, okay, I understand.
Yeah. And then there's something you might want to talk about.
Our gallery's prized and precious loan to the museum, which is a real moment of pride for us as a gallery, because our gallery represents the estate of Greta Magnuson Grossman, and we have her archives too. And generally speaking, what one sees in museum collections by Greta Grossman up to this point in time is her series of metal lamps, which were made in Burbank, California, which received significant coverage in the Good Design exhibitions of the 1950s. This 3-panel folding screen, which was designed in 1952 and appeared for a brief moment in the catalogs of the furniture company Glenn of California, is a classic example of a mid-century furniture firm experimenting with a truly radical form that is more modern art than design, only to probably yank it after 1 year because of poor sales, thus creating a collector's market decades later, which in turn shines the museum light back on the forgotten masterwork itself. And we know of only 2 examples of this screen. The other one has been loaned in the past to the Los Angeles County Museum of Art for their California design exhibition, Living in a Modern Way, the title of which is actually a quote by Greta. I think it perfectly captures the vital forms of the atomic age, to borrow another exhibition title, this time from the Brooklyn Museum. The screen was the centerpiece of an exhibition my colleague Evan Snyderman at R & Company organized on Grossman, which traveled to several institutions in the United States and in Grossman's homeland of Sweden about 8 years ago. Let's move on to what do we have next here?
Before we do, a really great shot. And there you are in front of it at the opening. And just wanted to say how grateful we were for the loan of this piece, because it really, as you can see, has a major impact in our gallery and is such a special and important piece. So thank you.
And this photograph was actually taken by a very dear friend of mine who is a collector who is loaned to the exhibition as well. So that's funny that you included. Thank you for that.
Of course.
Now, let me just talk a minute here about the lamp seen here, which is by Olga Lee, and was manufactured actually by the same teeny firm in Burbank, California, the Ralph O. Smith Company, who made Greta Grossman's lights. In this case, the lamp was made between 1952 and 1954. Retailing at the time for $29.50, this lamp was one of the most exhibited works of the Good Design era and was featured in the Good Design show at MoMA in 52, the Everyday Art Gallery at the Walker Art Center in 53, and the California Design exhibition at Pasadena in 54. Olga's career as a lighting, textile, and furniture designer could definitely warrant its own small exhibition. It's the finest example I've ever seen, and it's on loan to the museum by Mark McDonald, who was one of the founders of the 50/50 Gallery in New York, which I mentioned earlier, did a show on Alanka Karaz. And it was also, he was probably the first commercial gallery to really give Ray Eames her proper due as Charles Eames's design partner back when he actually worked with her in the early 80s. And then finally, we have this incredible tubular steel chair by the Hungarian-born Eva Zeisel, on loan from her estate, the only one left in private hands. Zeisel has been the subject of numerous exhibitions starting way back with Martin Eidelberg writing about her for the Montreal Museum in the 80s. And what I learned from seeing this exhibition in person and reading your label for it, Nonie, was the astonishing backstory behind Zeisel's frustration with making this chair. Maybe you can tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, well, this is I learned from, it's been in print, but it also shared by Zeisel's daughter, Jean Richards, who manages the estate and who kindly lent this piece to us. As you'll note, here's a period picture of the chair itself. Without its fabric covering, it would have had a fabric covering like a butterfly chair. But the one that survives in Zeisel's estate does not survive with its fabric covering. So we're showing it like she showed it here in the period with just the form itself, which is very sculptural. And if you can see in the picture next to it, there's Zeisel herself in her studio with small wire models for the chair, which is a really great image that Jean Richards also shared. And according to Zeisel, she created this and worked very hard with her studio on creating a die for this piece that to have it manufactured. And it was picked up by the Hudson Fixtures Corporation to create. They made some prototypes from Hudson Fixtures in the New York area, made a few, we don't know how many. We know 3 examples of this that exists. And then the die was sent out to Iowa to be mass manufactured. And the advertising started going and everything, and there was all sorts of printed advertisements for it. And according to Zeisel, the male foreman of the factory in Iowa looked at the die and learned that a woman designed it and figured there had to be something wrong with it because women don't know how to make mechanical dies. And he started tinkering with it. And he tinkered with it so much, he ruined it. And the piece never went into manufacture. So that's why there are only 3 existing, or at least 3 known existing pieces. Right. So it's one of those horrible stories. And as you probably know, Zeisel didn't return to furniture until the 1990s when she collaborated with Crate and Barrel. And I wouldn't blame her after that experience.
Exactly. Yeah, the other 2 are in
1948. In 48.
That's amazing. Yeah. Yeah, the other 2 chairs are in MoMA and Montreal, where they had the Zeisel exhibition. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, moving on then, I guess, to the next gallery.
Sure. Now I just thought I'd show you somewhat of the large central gallery, which was by far the most difficult for us because we didn't want to feature a single artist or even a small group, as that didn't feel inclusive enough. And instead, we developed an idea of women depicting women as our broad concept, meaning images of women created by women artists over the past century. And as I talk here, I'm going to give you a sneak preview of, can you see that now, James?
I can see it. So
Great.
I assume everyone can, yes.
Okay. Of the MFA's new, soon to be released online tour that's not quite out yet. but which is still in its prototype stages and its pilot stages. But so bear with me a little. But to give you an idea, as I talk, I'll let it go through here, which is sort of a fun way of seeing this exhibition. So to advise us on how to create this gallery effectively, respectfully, and inclusively, we held a roundtable discussion with an impressive and diverse group of local women community leaders who discussed what interested them and inspired them in the portraits we showed them. We listened to their comments and to their ideas and used them to develop our plan further. Their input helped us to shape the Central Gallery and encouraged us to take on issues of diversity and inclusion, to deal directly with the lack of inclusion in the women's suffrage movement, but also to champion the values of modern day feminism by creating a space for multiple points of view to be voiced and heard. We strove to equate art and suffrage and show how both can be powerful tools for expressing one's voice in the community. We wanted the faces on the walls to be as diverse as what we aspire our audiences to be. Through this, we could address an age-old comment that we have all heard before. I don't see myself or my heritage in the MFA. Why should I visit here? And it's a really fun space that you can, once it's live, maybe we could send it out a link, but you can read the text panels. You can go to objects and get more information, read the labels, wander around a little bit more.
Incredible, right.
And we were able to enhance what you're able to see. So for example, for this Lois Mailou Jones painting Ubi Girl from the Thai region, we were able to add family labels, K through 12 discussion topics, academic and adult learners, sort of prompts for discussion and so forth. So we have on our Frida Kahlo, a podcast that was based on the Kahlo. So we're able to add a lot more layers than we're able to in our gallery. And then what was also important to me here is also, I wanted to physically hear a woman's voice in the gallery. And for this, we connected with Portia Olayiwola, the poet laureate of the city of Boston, whom we commissioned to write a poem in response to the ideas of the exhibition. Her poem is entitled, "What is the Suffrage Movement to a Black Woman? An Anthem." We captured her powerful poem on video, which is shown in the gallery on a continuous loop. And I'll play that video for you now, if that sounds good.
Excellent. We do have time for sure.
Great. Oh no.
Oh no.
Well, you'll have to go see it for yourself. It's also online on our, but it's also on our website. I don't know why I don't have the, I didn't enable the audio.
Oh yeah. If you go up there, what about that little button there? Does that work? No. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. The best laid plans. Sorry, Portia.
What was incredible about the opening night, of course, when I was there, was that then people were using that podium throughout the night as well to read their own.
Yeah.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah. And then of course we have trying to add the visitor's voice in here as well. We have our visitor response wall, and we have scanned a number of the responses that we've gotten. And I love how people play off the works of art. Here's off of our Betty Cook necklace response, "Women Take the Floor." Or this one, shout out to Martin Eidelberg. Me and the girls at the MFA, our Lisa McVeigh display. But some really poignant pieces that this one really got me. A young African struggling with Western culture and her own. So there was really fascinating responses, and we have a lot of them scanned and are going to be available online.
Considering the ages of the kids who are writing these, and it brings me back, Nonie, to your—
Kids of all ages.
Yeah, oh, kids of all ages too, yes. But it does bring me back to your opening night remarks, where you mentioned that the museum's director, Matthew Teitelbaum, had asked what you hoped a 10-year-old Nonie Gadsden might experience when walking through Women Take the Floor, and that your instinctive response to him at the time was that you hoped she would discover that the contemporary feminist phrase, "nevertheless, she persisted," which dates to the 2017 remark by Mitch McConnell after silencing Elizabeth Warren's objections regarding the nomination of Jeff Sessions, is in fact an eternal statement about women, and in this case, American women artists. When the museum does eventually reopen its doors, hopefully later this summer, what are your thoughts about how this gallery of women's voices can be employed in terms of addressing everything that has happened to our nation over the past few months? I know that's a big question, but it's a good
really
final
big,
question.
Ambitious question, but an important one, and one that we should all be thinking about and talking about. And I don't know all the answers yet, and I hope to work with many to see what we can do using this exhibition. But as you would have heard if you heard Portia's poem, it explicitly addresses issues of racism and exclusion of Black women within the historical feminist movements like suffrage. And while these issues were always part of Women Take the Floor, they were not the focus. However, the recent wave of violence against Black people, such as George Floyd, has rightly driven them to the forefront of our conversations. The issues of inclusion and equity, of having a voice in your communities, and the importance of hearing and truly listening to multiple perspectives are more relevant and important today as ever. As I learned while working on Women Take the Floor, silence in the face of systemic inequity is not an option. The way forward is through confronting the injustices, spotlighting them for all to see, examining your own practices, and most importantly, listening to others. We need to change, and our institutions need to change. There's a lot of work ahead.
Yeah.
And my hope is that Women Take the Floor helps to foster some of those conversations, get those started, both with our visitors and, more importantly, within our institution.
Thank you, Nonie. Well, this has been a very crisply choreographed Zoom presentation, and we really achieved quite a bit there, and we have a little bit of time. And I'm looking at the Q&A, and there's another actually very deep question here posed to you from the curator, Colin Fanning. He writes, "The great framing of Women Publish Women and the mention of Peggy Guggenheim provide an interesting opening into the subjects of patronage and personal and professional networks, which have often played a big part in male-centric biographic art histories. Given the larger perspective shifts behind your research and interpretation for the exhibition, did you find that those topics required their own new treatments or reframing?"
That's a really great question. And those topics are very important in the women design world as we kept learning and identifying as we went through. And much more work needs to be done on that. But I wasn't able to pull out all of the mentorship and teaching relationships between women artists that is particularly strong. For example, Toshiko Takiezu, whose pottery you saw in the Women of Action gallery, was a student of Maya Grotel when she was at the Cranbrook Academy. And just the relationship between so many of these artists who inspired, encouraged, and really bolstered each other is something that really needs to be digged into more, because I think it has a very different track than the male-centered relationships that are similar, but I think these have a different way, and I think a lot more work needs to be done on that.
Excellent.
Thanks, Colin.
Now, Nonie, do you have the ability to scroll back through your PowerPoint presentation? I'd like you to go back to the textiles page with the Eva Hess at the Eva Hess, my goodness, with the Sheila Hicks at the center.
Yeah, there you go.
I have a question from a woman in the audience. Thank you. Could you please speak in more detail on the textile arts, please, particularly that golden piece? Thank you. And I think it's the Olga piece on the left there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there, this is just a stunning gallery that my colleague Lauren Whitley created. And the golden piece is by Olga de Amaral, a Colombian-born artist who was both was a trained architect who went into creating fiber works as she started them as woven walls to decorate for the interiors of architecture. And a lot of her early clients were her friends who were architects for their work, who she was discovered or got in contact with Jack Lenore Larson, who introduced her to the United States. And she, in these works that are the gold plated, these are all woven strips of linen that she then gold plated them. She started, I think, in the 80s, and really interesting referencing to the textile traditions of her native Colombia, as well as the gold traditions of her native land as well. And they just shimmer and shine, and they take different colors as you walk around them. They're really exquisite works.
I can't wait to get back there and look at everything again when you reopen. A final question here that I see, which I think you've answered before, but just to say it again, from Brian Lang, how does one access the virtual tour of the exhibition? I don't see it on the website. It's not up yet.
Yeah, you don't
right?
yet. Sorry. I had hoped by today that it would be live, but it will be soon. And you'll be able to access it through the exhibition page on MFA.org, the Women Take the Floor exhibition page. And perhaps I'm sure my department has just recently started an Instagram account at America's MFA, and I'm sure we will post it there as well to let people know when it is live.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you know what? The questions are coming in right now again here. We have a question from Francesca Falzoni from the Carpenters Workshop Gallery in New York. Which is a question that it's a statement that I've heard before in my own job at R & Company. The Baltimore Museum of Art, for example, will acquire art only by women in 2020, which is something I've seen in other museums such as LACMA. What do you think, Nonie, of this call to action, and how should galleries representing female artists approach the subject with museums and their board members?
That's a really good question. And absolutely, I think it was a really bold move by Baltimore. I think it's taking a really important stance, and I applaud it. I think that we have so many different groups of artists that we have underrepresented and underappreciated, that I would like to include all of those artists to take a more inclusive view in emphasizing the need to collect artists of color and artists of different ethnic backgrounds and religions. So that would be my desire and focus. I do think women play, obviously, it's very near and dear to my heart, and something I think museums should focus on a lot. And it's something that I personally am taking on to try to make sure that my acquisitions are at least 50-50 male and female, to try to continue to up those numbers, if not better. But it's, I think it's really talking to the curators. And part of this project is teaching the institutional staff and its board about that these discrimination continues. One of the statistics I put on the wall as you walked in is that the MFA acquired nearly 3,800 or something works of art by women artists in the last 10 years, which I was so psyched when I saw that number. I was like, way to go, we're awesome. Until I realized it was 5% of our acquisitions of that time. And that's
amazing.
Terrifying.
Wow.
And so we have to call that out and make it more available. We need to shine a light to ourselves, as well as our board, as well as to our collecting community surrounding us. And museums are built off of their community, and their supporters. Museums are not built off of their, acquisition funds. So, the more collectors and supporters that we can inspire to collect women artists, the more we have potential for those things coming into our collection.
I so strongly agree with you on that. And I can tell you as well, Nonie, in that sense, and I do encourage everyone out there listening who is, not a curator, who is that, one of the great secrets to being a museum patron is to have a relationship with your local curator at your museum. And that so many objects of modern design, whether it's by Belle Kogan or Eva Zeisel's dinnerware, many of these works are incredibly affordable for a private collector to buy. And by incredibly affordable, I mean, works that are in the hundreds of dollars that you can pick up. And having a good relationship with that curator, since curators have to go through such a rigorous acquisitions process in adding works to their collection, if you have a good relationship with your curator and you are collecting like dinnerware by Eva Zeisel, it can be an amazing way to be a patron yourself and add works to a museum's collection that in theory the museum might have the money to buy, but really they can then use their money to buy something else instead. And so it's something I say over and over again, that museum quality can be something that goes hand in hand with low cost as well. And that's a great way to strengthen.
One of my favorite collections that I've had the privilege of acquiring for the MFA was from my former colleague, Jerry Ward.
Yeah. Yes.
Who collected modern plastic. So plastic from the heyday of the 40s and 50s. And he collected, he said he rarely got into the two figures. He was buying these things at junk stores and flea markets and so forth, but they're major works of design by major designers. Russell Wright, George Nelson, Belle Kogan. And so it's really, it's a start of a major collection. And that's something I'm very curious, as you heard me speak up earlier, is to explore plastic and the history of plastics more.
I'm excited about that. Thank you so much, Nonie, for joining us today. And as I said to the audience out there, there will be a version of this available. We'll be putting it on our website. We'll be sharing it in some way with the MFA Boston. It will be on a Zoom channel. And once again, everybody out there, thank you so much for joining us. I'm James ZEMAITIS with Nonie Gadsden, and hopefully you'll visit Boston in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
All right. Are we back on